All right, today I'm going to be going through a carburetor on a 1998 Suzuki Quadrunner 500. This is the LTF 500. Do believe the LTA 500 is the same. That would be the Quadmaster. It's an automatic as opposed to the foot shift, the manual transmission. So we've got the carburetor off right now. We are going to go through everything, every orifice on this carburetor. I'm going to show you exactly what it does and explain to you how to properly clean your carburetor. We have got the choke already off right now, and I wanted to show you this. This is a plastic cap. There's a spring under here. Then this is called the plunger here. This is a 12 millimeter cap. You just want to make sure that you're being careful when you're removing this cap so that you don't round that off. As it is plastic, it's easy to damage. Also, going back together, make sure those threads are lined up when you are reinstalling this. We're going to set this aside, otherwise it's just going to be in our way when we're going through this carburetor, but it sits in this orifice here. When you pull your choke lever there, it will pull that plunger out, allowing fuel to come out of this orifice here, allowing air to come out this orifice here. And then you also have well, I'll go through there when I get to the top of that carburetor, but I wanted to show you that choke plunger. The other thing I wanted to show you, we've got your throttle cable that's going to come in here. It's going to be covered up with this cap here. Looks like this, says Mikuni on it. The other thing, we've got this piece here, and this is what your cable is going to sit in. That cable is going to run down through here. There's a threaded area here. It's going to run down, come out that port there. It's going to wrap around this butterfly here, and then you're going to put it into that port there. Then you're going to slide that cap on there and line it up there. Then when you give it throttle, when you push the thumb throttle on this four-wheeler, it's going to raise your butterfly there, or it's going to pull this butterfly here. It's going to open it up there. The other thing that it's going to be doing at the same time is lifting your diaphragm up here and your slide and your needle up here, allowing more fuel to come through there, flow through there, allowing more air to flow through there as well. So just wanted to kind of show you what that was. You can leave your throttle cable on the four-wheeler, or some people will take it off of the thumb throttle area, pull it out through around your frame there, and leave it connected to your carburetor. I don't like doing that because it just seems like more work to pulling that cable out. I like to just leave that cable on the four-wheeler. We'll do a separate video of removing that throttle cable out of the carburetor, and as well as removing the cable off of the four-wheeler. So check my channel for that video. The other video I wanted to tell you about, and I think it's going to be important, is I'm going to do a comparison video. This is a genuine Suzuki carburetor, and there's a lot of knockoff unbranded carburetors, and I'm going to go through. I'm going to actually set an unbranded carburetor right beside this one. We're going to go through and I'm going to point out the differences between the two. That way you know if you're buying a quality carburetor, if there's things that need to be modified or changed, if you should even buy one of those. You can buy those for a pretty reasonable price. These OEM ones are much more expensive, and I guess I'll tell you in that video if I like the unbranded or not. So we'll go through that video. We'll go through those carburetors later on. This is a Mikuni carburetor. I'll say Mikuni Corp here. That we've got a model number of 09F0E815. So that number is going to be stamped right there, directly below this cap here, right on the side there. All right, first thing we're going to do, we're going to pull this bottom bowl off. And this is typically, if your four-wheeler is hard starting, if it's not running right, a lot of times it's due to gummed up fuel in this area here or damaged parts. You're going to pull these 4 Phillips screws off. Keep in mind your idle adjust is here. This screw is going to be slightly longer. Also include a washer on that screw there. So just remember where that's coming from. Before we pull this bottom bowl, I wanted to show you another thing. You can drain this fuel when it's on the four-wheeler, or you can drain it when it's sitting here on the bench. You just take and loosen this screw, and it only has to be a couple turns out. You don't have to remove this screw all the way, and that fuel is going to start dumping out that bottom nipple there. Also, as an overflow, if your fuel is sloshing around in your bottom bowl here, and as opposed to dumping down into the cylinder, that fuel is going to dump out this bottom nipple here. That being said, you want to make sure that you keep a fuel line attached to this bottom nipple here, because when you are bouncing around on trails or on the back of a trailer in the back of a pickup, that fuel is going to slosh around. It's going to drip onto your motor is going to discolor your motor, take the paint off your motor. So keep that in mind. Keep your fuel hose connected onto here. Run that all the way down. You just want to make sure that that fuel line, that vent line is unplugged so that fuel can drain all the way out. Okay, once we got those 4 Phillips screws loosened, I'm going to take and pull them off. Again, keeping in mind about this, this idle adjust here. And I'm going to set those aside. I'm going to take, and now we can pull our bottom bowl off. Now, a carburetor just came directly off the four-wheeler, and it had fuel in this carburetor. At this point, you're going to have fuel all over the place, so keep that in mind. Just be careful where you're opening this carburetor up. The other thing I wanted to show you before we get into some details here is your idle adjust. Now, when you're adjusting idle, what you're doing is turning this knob here. Clockwise is going to turn your idle up, and what that's doing is pushing your butterfly open, allowing more air to flow through your carburetor. Turn your idle down, it's going to, which is counterclockwise, it's going to lower that butterfly. You might not be able to see it here, but this butterfly is actually not even touching this idle adjust screw at this time. So obviously they didn't need to turn that idle up at all. Now if you're running maybe in colder conditions or different riding altitude, you may have to adjust this idle. Now I want to tell you right now, you want to make sure that your four-wheeler is completely warmed up before you go to adjust that idle. Otherwise you're going to have issues once your four-wheeler is warmed up. So just keep that in mind. From your fuel tank, you're going to have a fuel line that's going to run into this port here. What that does is that fuel dumps in here, runs along this rail here. Right here, this is called your needle seat or your fuel seat valve down here. And you've got and I'll show you this in a little bit, but you've got a tab right here that you can adjust your float height. Check your manual. You want to make sure that you have this set properly for your riding conditions. Also, these needles do wear. Sometimes you got to adjust those accordingly. Sometimes you just have to buy a carb kit and replace the needle and seat here. So keep in mind that fuel is dumping in here, coming out through here, and I'm going to show you that when I get this pulled off. First thing I like to do is pull this pin here. You want to be really careful. These posts here are aluminum. They get damaged very, very easily. So you just want to make sure that you don't grab a pair of pliers or a hammer, start beating on this pin here to push it out. Don't start jerking on this pin on this area as well. What I like to do is grab a small pair of side dikes and just pull it out just like this. Now a lot of times if you wiggle it back and forth and pull it out, it'll just be able to slide out just like that. And that pin has got a stop on the end of it, so going back in, we'll just push it in and can't go any farther than that. Some of them actually slide all the way through. You don't have to worry about those falling out because these pins actually sit in this area here on this carburetor and it can't go either direction. So next we'll take and pull this float up. We've got your needle down there and below there. These needles have a rubber tip on them and they get grooved and worn. Sometimes those tips break off if they're older. So you want to make sure you inspect that tip really well, make sure it's in good condition. You also want to make sure that this wire is secure and in the proper place so that when that fuel comes in from that fuel tank, your fuel gets shut off when it needs to. So set that aside there. Make sure and clean that out really good. If you order a jet kit, 9 times out of 10, that needle is going to come with it. Next thing that you can replace, and some jet kits don't come with this, carb rebuild kits, but I wish they all did. You pull this Phillips screw out right here, and your seat is right here. Pull this Phillips screw, pop that out. Now you don't really want to pull this out, or you want to be awful careful pulling it out if you're not going to replace it, because this is a brass fitting right here. If you take pliers, put them on here and pull up, if you're having to put too much pressure because it's brass, you can bend this very, very easily. So if you don't have a new one in your carb kit, maybe don't even pull that. You want to make sure you blow through here with carbon choke cleaner and then compressed air. Make sure there's no debris stuck up in there. I like to blow out the other way too, because a lot of times these have a screen on in behind there. Next is your main jet. This is going to be a 130 main jet, and I don't want to say across the board that all of them are going to be 130. For our riding condition, that's what it's going to be. So this is the largest of the two jets, the largest orifice, and it's just a round jet. You've got a washer underneath there. It looks like that, very, very small. You want to make sure that you can see through there. Hold that up to light. You want to be able to see through it, blow through it, shoot carbon choke cleaner through it. And if you need to clean it, we've got these jet cleaners that you can purchase from us, and they got all different sizes. That's obviously going to be too big, so maybe check a little bit smaller one, and they're ribbed. So you run that up and down in there, and it cleans that jet really well. And I also like to take carbon choke cleaner then and clean it out, get that small debris out of there. So again, want to make sure that that washer stays with it. Make sure you keep those together. Next, we have your pilot jet, and this is the most commonly plugged up jet. This your four-wheeler won't start good. It won't idle good if this idle jet is plugged up. So grab a small screwdriver. I don't like to grab them so small that they're going to turn and just turn inside that jet. But if you got one that's going to fit down in there and fit in that slot, then go ahead and use it. So loosen that up. And this sits down there far enough to where we've got to take and flip that carburetor over, and there is your pilot jet there. Again, really, really small. Numbers are going to be engraved on the side of this jet here, and this is a 55. So again, you want to make sure you can clean it out, make sure you can blow through it, make sure you can see through it. Again, if you need a jet kit, let us know. A jet cleaning kit, let us know. And you can take and slide these wires through there, make sure it's cleaned out. So again, if your four-wheeler is not idling well, if your idle is adjusted properly, and if your four-wheeler is not starting well, very well could be this pilot jet. And we'll do an overview of this four-wheeler. So if your four-wheeler isn't starting good at all, or it's not running well, we'll go through and show you a couple different things on this four-wheeler to help you do that. We'll also go through and service this four-wheeler. So we have got almost everything out of the bottom side of that carburetor at this point. The other thing I want to show you is your air fuel screw here. Now this air fuel screw runs all the way up into here, and you can see there's a very, very small port that is right here. You want to make sure that that air fuel screw is adjusted properly. And the way that you do that is you run that screw all the way in, and then you take and run that screw back out the number of turns that your manual says. Typically, it's about 2 turns out, sometimes 2.5, sometimes 1 3/4, but a lot of times it's in between that 1.5 and 3 turns out. And there is a spring that's in there that will keep your air fuel screw from falling out as long as you keep it within the range that your manual says. So we'll go ahead and pull that. I just wanted to show you that. Pull it out there. Take and dump that out. There is your needle there for your air fuel screw. And then underneath that is a spring. Underneath that is a very, very small washer. Underneath that washer is an O-ring. So you want to make sure that they go back in that order if they come out, if you pull them out. If you take compressed air and blow through that port there on this side, very, very small port, but you could potentially blow that O-ring and that washer out, so just be careful and just know that those are down there. Now what we could do is take a pick, stick it down there, pull those out. I don't want to damage that O-ring, so I'm just going to leave those in there. And we've blown through it this direction with compressed air and cleaned it out really well with carbon choke cleaner. So again, O-ring, then washer, then spring, and then your air fuel screw. Drop it down in there, make sure it seats properly. Now you take and turn that all the way in until it's seated. And then you back it out. Half turn, 1.5, 2.5. We did 2.5 turns out. Okay, next thing we're going to do is go through the top of your carburetor here. And before I forget to show you this, I want to show you these lines right here are vent lines. So you may, these hoses are, it's probably one hose that runs up here, and then this one may have a T that connects it, and then those are probably going up to a higher position on the four-wheeler. The reason you do that is because if you're ever riding through water and water is coming up to your carburetor here, if you don't have hoses on these lines here, you're going to have water dumped directly into your the bowl of your carburetor, getting water into your carburetor. Now you can see if you have those hoses off, you have the float off of here, you can actually see daylight through those ports there. So those are very, very large ports, and you should be able to blow through them with compressed air. Should be able to go see right through there. The other thing is this line here, and this is a air line as well. That's a vent line there, and it actually breathes right here into your carburetor. So you can see that there. There's a port there that runs here. So you want to make sure that those lines are on your four-wheeler correctly. And I believe, I'd have to double check, but I believe this goes up to your fuel petcock. So it kind of determines how much fuel is being pumped into your carburetor. All right, we're going to flip this up. Next thing you're going to do, there's 4 screws up here. We're going to take our Phillips screwdriver and pull these off. Now, I am going to leave my finger on top here, kind of putting a little bit of pressure down, because there is a spring underneath of this cap, and it's not a real high tension spring. Parts aren't going to go flying everywhere when you pull this cap off, but I do like to make sure that I'm pulling this cap off carefully, because this rubber diaphragm under here is extremely fragile and very, very expensive. Move those screws aside. We've got several different sizes of screws. I'll go through that when we're going back together. 4 screws. Now, carefully remove that cap. A lot of times what will happen is this diaphragm will actually stick to the cap. You'll pull everything, diaphragm, slide, needle, spring, everything up when you remove this cap. That wasn't the case here. So we've got a cap and a spring. We'll set that aside. Now we have your diaphragm right here. And I'm going to take my finger, push up on here very carefully, because a lot of times what happens is that that diaphragm will stick in this groove here, and so it can rip very, very easily. You can take and kind of push it up like I did there, or sometimes I'll take a small screwdriver very carefully, just work my way around there, just so you don't rip it. These diaphragms, again, are very, very expensive. So try not to get this with carbon choke cleaner or get gas on this diaphragm. Tends to expand, or it a lot of times will be a little bit disformed, or it makes it a whole lot easier to rip it. So you just want to make sure that you don't get any kind of cleaner on this diaphragm here. Right here is your needle, and this needle at this point will just slide right up. There's nothing holding it in. And underneath of that needle down in here is your needle. You've got a plastic piece there, and then you've got a clip, and this needle is adjustable. There's several different positions you can put this clip on, so if you're needing to raise or lower it, you can do that with a clip there, whatever your manual says. This is, I believe, 3 clips down from the top, and your manual will tell you where it needs to be. All right, the other piece that is in there is this plastic washer there. I'll show you when we're going back together where that goes. Real quick, I wanted to show you why I have this carburetor in this position. What happens here is I'm going to put this needle down in there quick. Okay, now if we were to take this slide and we're to put it in here, this needle is going to go directly into your main jet area here. So we take and slide this down. I'm just going to very, very carefully, just because I want to show you how to do this, slide it in there. Make sure it goes in the right groove there. Guess we don't have our spring putting pressure on there, so our needle is going to push up. So I'm going to put that spring down in there. Now, what is happening is, and if this was, and it is all the way down, you can see that needle right through there. So when you give your four-wheeler throttle, when you push the thumb throttle, that butterfly in the back is going to open up. This is going to go up, your slide is going to go up, and your needle is going to go up. Your needle is going to come up. That's going to allow more fuel to get sucked up out of your bottom bowl area here through your main jet, which is restricted by the size of main jet that you have. So if you're adding performance to the four-wheeler, maybe it needs a little more fuel, what you're going to want to do is change this main jet. Now, your book, if you've added a lot of performance or you're riding in different altitude altogether, your book may tell you to swap that needle out or change positions of that pin. So when you're giving it gas, that fuel is coming up through your main jet there and coming up where your needle sits and coming up around your needle. And then full wide open throttle, your needle is going to be almost out of that groove there. It's not going to come out of that groove there. If it did, it would get lodged and stuck and your throttle wouldn't come back down. So you just want to remember that this main jet here is what is restricting that fuel, as well as your needle here, and that's what's keeping and controlling that fuel, the amount of fuel going into your engine and speeding up your four-wheeler. So going back together now, I'm going to take and remove that main jet there. I like to take, and it doesn't, this slide here can go on either direction, and so you want to make sure that you've got this tab here lined up with the tab that is on the top of your carburetor. Now what I like to do is take and fold this diaphragm down very carefully again, because you don't want it to rip. And remember where your tab is there. I like to set this down into position there very carefully. You want to make sure that you look and see that that needle goes down into that main jet holder where I showed you earlier. Make sure this is properly seated. Now, if you've gotten fuel or carb cleaner on it, what I would do is set it out on the windowsill and let that sun beat down on it and dry it out that way. Okay, we've got our needle down in position there. We've got our slide in position there. Now, I'm going to take and still keeping my finger underneath of there so that that diaphragm isn't pushed down. Now, if we're to take and push this down, what happens a lot of times is this diaphragm will pull itself up out of here. That's why I like to have it mushroom down like I do, so that it's seated properly and we can see that it's staying in place there until we get our cap on. So again, putting it back in place there, grab our cap, make sure our spring is on there. And you do have to come down a little bit because this spring will sometimes do this on you going in, and you want this bottom tab here to line up with that spring and go down into that groove there. So line that up, set that cap on there. Now, I don't like to take my finger out from underneath of that slide until I get these screws on there. Now, these are going to be the shortest of the, I believe, 11 Phillips screws that we have removed here. These are going to be the shortest ones that you have, so keep that in mind. Don't use your long ones. It's not going to damage anything on this one. These screws actually go all the way through, but you're going to get down to the bottom and have to remove your top cap here. So take, and we'll tighten these up. All right, once we got them all tightened up there and snugged up, we can take our finger out from underneath of there. Your slide and your needle should drop back down into the position that it should be in, which is that. Now we can take and set our carburetor on its top just like that. Putting our main jet back in. Don't forget your washer there. Make sure it's all cleaned out and blown through. This one you can tell is slightly discolored. It's not terrible. We've had some fuel sitting in there that was not great, and it's discolored our carburetor. We're going to put this actually in an ultrasonic cleaner and clean it out really good before we do our video, the unbranded video versus the genuine carburetor video. So it doesn't matter which direction this needle goes on. That needle is right in the center of that needle, and slide that on. Drop that down into place there. Make sure that slides freely in there, and then take this needle, push it in, or push this pin in. Now you should be able to get it most of the way with your finger there. If you can't, maybe try something, maybe try wiggling it back and forth to make sure it's in its groove there. We've got our pilot jet that needs to go in. Drop that down in there. Again, with the screwdriver, make sure you've got a screwdriver that fits down in there. Snug that up. Now we've got our bottom bowl here. Put that in the position it needs to go. Keep in mind where your idle screw goes. And again, that's the longest screw. Slide that down into position. If you don't have your pin in all the way, the pin that holds your float in, these screws won't go in. So keep that in mind. If your screws aren't lining up, your screw holes aren't lining up, maybe that pin isn't all the way. We'll snug these 4 screws up, and that is the carb clean on a Suzuki 500. Now all we have to do is slide this back onto the four-wheeler. We'll wait and put this throttle cable cap and those screws on until we get it on the four-wheeler and hook that cable up. If you've got any questions at all, make sure you mention those in the comments below. If this video has been helpful, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you are notified when we post more videos on this Suzuki 500, as well as the unbranded carburetor versus the genuine carburetor. Make sure you check that out. I think you're going to want to see that. So thanks for watching.